Nathan, how are you?
Very well, John. Thanks for having me on.
Let's talk first about this parole board decision that released Derek Pettis. He was originally sentenced 30 years to life back in 96, convicted of first-degree murder. He shot to death Bruce Bryan, a volunteer chaplain in L.A. County, and he also shot in the eye, shot in the head, an L.A. County deputy, Terrence Wenger. Wenger somehow survived, lost his eye, but he was seriously hurt, obviously. And Pettis should have spent the rest of his life in prison without question. But the parole board was going to let him go. Talk about that, and then talk about your campaign to convince Newsom to reverse the parole.
Absolutely. So what happened is I was well aware that George Gascon has a policy never to send one of his prosecutors to go with the victim families to a parole hearing. And in this case, it was the parole hearing for Derek Pettis, someone who, as you mentioned, shot dead a volunteer chaplain, as well as attempted to murder a deputy back in the mid-1990s. And he was up for parole. And sure enough, because the prosecutor was not there to present the evidence of the crime, and more importantly, the fact that Pettis had actually used a shank while he was awaiting trial on the case, the parole board on September 6th of 2023 granted parole. But what it does at that point, it puts a 6-month procedure in place where the governor can overturn and reverse that grant. So what I did is I wrote a letter directly to the governor, and I highlighted this matter because otherwise it would be swept under the rug. I wrote an article in a local newspaper as well. I encouraged all my supporters to contact the governor and ask him and beg him to reverse the parole board's decision granting this assassin, this murderer, parole and letting him out essentially. And I'm happy to report that on January 29th, just several days ago, Governor Newsom actually reversed the parole board, listened to the arguments that I and my supporters have made, and is keeping Derek Pettis in jail for at least 2 more years before he'll have another parole hearing.
So he's going to be there now until, what, 2026?
Yeah, 2025, 2026. And I will tell you this. When I'm the DA at that point, I will have my prosecutors go with the family of those murdered victims to that parole hearing and make the case why Derek Pettis should spend the rest of his life in jail.
I think most people would be surprised to find out that the parole hearing officers don't have all this information, that it would automatically be part of the material that they're going through.
You would think that they should have all this information. But what they don't have is, in essence, the prosecutor making the case as to why this person committed the crimes in the first place, also making the case of the crimes he committed while he was waiting for his trial in this instance, and sort of being the voice for the victims. Because imagine that. You're the victim family of Chaplain Bryan, or you're the family of Chaplain or Deputy Wedner, and you're confronting your murderer, and he's got counsel, the parole board's there, and the prosecutor has access to the parole board's file that the victim families do not have access to, and can make the point on whether or not true rehabilitation has occurred, or whether or not this particular murderer deserves to spend the rest of his life in jail. Without the prosecutor there, the victim family is basically unrepresented. They're unable to make their arguments in any compelling way to the parole board, so it's not a shock that this parole board went ahead and granted parole, but thankfully we were able to get that information to Governor Newsom, and he reversed the parole grant in this case.
Is this one of Gascon's blanket policies? A prosecutor doesn't show up at any parole hearings?
He reversed a 40-year policy of prosecutors going with the victims to parole hearings, and basically says, because I believe he's much more pro-criminal than pro-victim, that he's no longer allowing his prosecutors to go with the victims at these parole hearings. That is one of his blanket policies that I would reverse on day one.
You would, I assume, have a blanket policy in the other direction, and there'd be a prosecutor accompanying every victim's family before a parole board.
Absolutely.
How is the campaign going? I've seen your television commercials, which look really good. I think your name recognition is going to pick up a lot. I see the polls are all over the place. What's your feeling on the state of the race from your perspective?
The state of the race is where I was hoping it was going to be when we first entered the race back in April. I think the recent polls that were actually conducted before we began the last 2 weeks of commercials, one of the advantages of having raised more money than any other candidate, in fact, by a factor of 100%, is that I'll be able to get my message to the millions of people who are going to vote. And you're right, in part, this is name identification, name recognition, and getting the message of how I'm going to defeat George Gascon, why he should be defeated by enacting the most pro-criminal policies, and how I'm going to restore accountability and prosecute criminals. That message is getting out loud and clear on TV, radio, social media, text messages, email, and print mail. And I believe that that campaign that I would not only wage in the primary, but wage it toe-to-toe to get Gascon out of office in the general election is why I will be in the top two for the primary and then beat Gascon in the November general runoff.
For people, since 2/3 of the public is not made a decision yet, and I'm sure many of them don't know who you are, even though you have been working in office for quite a while or working as a U.S. district attorney. Talk about your background, just a quick rundown of your resume so people understand your experience.
Certainly. I have 34 years of criminal justice experience. I was a federal prosecutor for 7 years, going after narcotics traffickers, violent gang members, international money launderers, and environmental criminals. I got a presidential appointment, unanimous Senate confirmation to run the U.S. Department of Justice's tax division during the President George W. Bush years. I also was the president of the L.A. City Ethics Commission and the co-founder of the L.A. Sheriff's Foundation. So I actually have the street cred and the resume and the experience. Unlike Gascon, who's never personally prosecuted a case or defended one, I have personally prosecuted 100 cases and defended 200 of them. I can take over for as the district attorney and be ready to go on day one in a way that not only is Gascon severely inexperienced and misguided for, but I have the resume and the experience to beat out every other challenger as well.
Well, Nathan, we'll talk with you again soon. Thank you for coming on, and good work on helping to reverse that parole decision.
I really appreciate that, and I'm sure so does the families of Chaplain Bryan and Officer Wenger.
All right, Nathan Hochman, candidate for district attorney here in L.A. County against Gascon. We'll talk again soon, Nathan. Thank you.